Hi, DD Solar here. In this video, I wanted to talk about some problems I've had with my metal building. I call it my solar workshop because it's almost entirely powered by solar and has quite a few solar panels around it. There were many problems with this building, but one of the more aggravating ones was right where my workbench is located, which is in this area here. There is a very rhythmic and staccato popping sound or snapping sound depending on the temperature outside and the sun and everything else. And it was absolutely the most aggravating thing in the building at the moment. If you're somebody who has a wrecked nervous system, that probably isn't too healthy for it. I can think of a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want to hear any sounds like that while you're trying to focus and concentrate on your work. Now, any metal building is going to have noises and sounds. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. But the kind of sound I'm referring to, it was on another level. This was beyond aggravating. This was maddening. So in this video, I'm going to show you what I did to start addressing the problem, and I've had some success, and I wanted to share that in this video clip. As I'm sure you know, the fit and finish and build quality of metal buildings often leaves much to be desired. In my case, I had many different issues I had to fix myself after the professionals finished their work, and I'm still fixing issues even today. Inevitably, I had to call the company back multiple times. They had to address several issues that were a bit over my head. So one of the weird issues I had was this piece of trim here, which is placed around the roll-up door. It's just standard metal trim, and it's in the shape of an L. So this is one side of it, and this is the other side of it. This actually had a resonant frequency, and when the wind would come in here and catch this trim, it would resonate and start rattling violently. It's very strange. It was really hard to tell exactly what was going on. I would come out here and try to push the trim and pull the trim and try different things. Eventually what I figured out was this trim was resonating and it was slamming into the metal sheet, which is right here. So this is cut off behind the trim, and it was slamming into this trim, and the trim was going like this. Very weird issue. What I ended up doing was I took scraps of tar paper and some foam backing rod, and I stuffed that in here. I also adjusted the screws which were holding the trim on. Eventually, after several attempts, the problem went away. I may have heard it once in a while, but if I have, it's not really a problem anymore. Whereas before, it was basically unbearable. It was constantly happening. Every time the wind would blow, you hear this giant rattling sound. It was ridiculous. Newsflash, when the wind blows, if anything's loose, it can rattle, and it can cause issues. Okay, probably the worst sound that this building makes, there is a very rhythmic snapping, popping, and cracking sound that would happen somewhere in this area. It was around in here. There was 2 or 3 of them, and they were incredibly loud, and they were very rhythmic. It was almost like a timed sequence. It was strange how even the sound was. So I chased this sound for quite a while. It aggravated me really, really bad. I kept pushing on the wall, and I couldn't really see or hear where the sound was coming from. But eventually, after about 6 months of wrangling with it, I started to zero in on the problem. And the problem is multifold. It has multiple parts to it. But one of the parts is over-tightened fasteners. So these fasteners are usually put in with impact drivers, and I was watching a lot of the fellows who built this building put these fasteners in, and I could tell they were really slamming them in hard. And unfortunately, a large percentage of these fasteners are over-tightened. So over-tightened fasteners is one of the #1 causes of these cracking and creaking sounds that you can hear. I'm sure there is a professional way of putting these fasteners in and a certain way to tighten them and all that. I really don't care about that. All I care about is what's right for my needs. And I do not want to see these fasteners put in so tight that the rubber hangs out the side and the metal fastener is making contact with the sheathing. You should not put the fasteners in that tight. There needs to be a little bit of give because this is a very long piece of metal. This metal sheathing here is really, really long. It can be 20 feet long or however long it is. And so when you have a 20-foot long piece of metal and it gets hot, it's going to contract and expand significantly. So this is going to be a significant difference. Inevitably, that piece of metal is going to change its length a little bit, and there's going to be sounds, there's going to be movement. But when you have a fastener like this, or 30 or 40 of them, and they're driven in so tight that the rubber is stripped out and the metal's making contact with the sheathing, it's too tight. This building is littered with artifacts of professional work. You can see right here, this fastener was driven in at a 45-degree angle, and on one side the rubber is crushed, and on the other side it's sticking out. Really top-notch work. So if you see any issues like that, sometimes those need to be corrected in order to help with the sound. That's not necessarily causing the sound, but honestly, at the very least, this is a potential water leak and should be addressed. So I found beauties like this all over my building. In some cases, I just found a hole with no fastener in it. That was a lot of fun. So in regards to the popping and cracking sounds, here's what the process I went through. First, I used my ear and I went along the wall here and I started listening to see where I thought the sound was coming from. Now that's easier said than done. It's really hard sometimes to tell exactly where the sound is coming from. But eventually I narrowed it down to this section of wall that I'm pointing the camera at. And there's probably 30, 40 different fasteners here. And who knows where exactly the sound was coming from, but I narrowed it down to at least an 8-foot by 8-foot area. Next, I started going along looking for over-tightened fasteners, and sure enough, I found a lot of them. Now, these fasteners have already been worked over, and unfortunately, I think they'll need to be replaced. They were tightened so badly that I think the rubber is damaged, crushed, destroyed. So what I would do is I'd come along this wall here, listening for the sound, and I'd be careful not to allow my shadow to land on this wall, because when you put a shadow on the wall, you're changing the thermal properties. It's going to cool off in that spot where the shadow is. What you want to do is be near the wall, but don't block the sun, because that's what's causing the sound, usually. And I would just go along with my ear, and I would try to find out where the sound was coming from. And when I thought I had it, I would just push on the wall like this. And I would sometimes just take my foot and push at the wall. And I would try to duplicate the sound that I was hearing. And in many cases, I was successful. Next, I would come over here to one of these fasteners, and I'd start looking at each one, and I'd see, does it look like it's over-tightened? You have to look at them pretty close. And it's a little hard sometimes to gauge. There's that one. So yeah, there's a real beauty there. Once I found a fastener that I thought was over-tightened, I would go ahead and I would take a impact driver or a ratchet, ideally, and I would just loosen it maybe a half a turn. Don't take it out, but just loosen it a little bit. And when you do that, also look at the fasteners that are nearby. So this fastener here, and I would just keep doing that. I don't want to do too many of these fasteners at the same time. And you don't want to loosen them so that they leak. It's very tricky. There's a very narrow window of specification here. You don't want to loosen them any more than you have to. This one here is probably okay. On this area of wall, I've pretty much gotten all of them. And I think most of the ones here are okay. Most of the sound is coming from over here. And I think I've just about killed the sound. It's just about gone. It does make an occasional sound, but it's really not bad. The next sound was over here on this wall, incidentally, also near my workbench area. Incredibly annoying. In the morning, the sun comes out and hits this wall here. This is the other wall. And there are no windows or anything. It's just a metal wall. Boy, this sound was really aggravating. It was driving me nuts. I used the same technique I just described. I used my ear. I tried not to let my shadow on the wall. And I traced this particular sound all the way down to right there. So if you look right there, there's actually, I don't know if you can see it or not, there's actually a fastener driven up. It's driven this way, up this way. And what's happened is the concrete right here, if you look right there, is in contact with the metal sheathing. And this concrete is very rough, and it catches on the edge of the metal sheathing. You can see right there. And what was happening was this sheathing was moving, and it was picking at the concrete. So what I did is I went and I loosened the screw here, and I just kept tweaking it a little bit at a time, and the sound went away. Now, just a word of warning, if you have a building built like this where they took the metal sheathing down to the concrete, you can see it hangs off the side of the slab. That is very important, because that's going to keep water out and that's going to keep rodents out. So you don't want to loosen these screws so much so that a gap opens up to allow mice and insects to enter. I'm not suggesting you loosen or remove these screws. I'm suggesting you use your ear, find the problem, and then gently ease back on the screw tension until you hear an improvement. And there's probably other things you can do to solve this problem, but I'm just telling you how I did it. Now, there are hundreds and hundreds of fasteners here. I did not go to every single fastener and loosen them. What I did is a spot treatment. I just focused on the areas that were making the most aggravating sounds. And I was careful not to loosen the fasteners too much, because I don't want them to leak. So I don't suggest that you go and just randomly loosen fasteners. Really, I would target the area where the sound is that's annoying you and try to hunt it down and work on the fastener tension in that area and try to get a solid result there before you move on. I am not claiming you can solve all of the annoying sounds in a metal building with a ratchet and your ear. However, this system worked well for me, and so I wanted to post a video in case it helps somebody else. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.